Little Archie, Issue 61, Beach Magic. A cop naps on the beach saying that nothing ever happens there, and then gets scared when Sabrina's family lands on the beach flying on a broom. Hilda tells Zelda she's terrible at her landings, and the cop assumes they're invading aliens. Witches are from a separate universe, and in the modern age, it makes more sense that someone would assume they're aliens that just look like witches because that's more sci-fi. But you'd think Zelda would be great at landings after hundreds of years. Hilda makes a snarky comment about his looks, and despite the cop seeing them land on the beach with a broom, he's dedicated enough to his job to tell Sabrina that her cat's not allowed on the beach. Sabrina uses magic to change the sign to say that coming soon on the beach is a pet shop featuring cute cats for sale. Hilda makes her hat to a dressing room in front of the cop. I guess because she's too lazy to go all the way to the actual dressing room. The cop says they can't do any camping on the beach, being an unnecessarily mean stickler to the rules instead of knowing when to run away. It makes sense that he'd think he'd get fired if he didn't do his job, so he has to do it, even though his boss would never believe any of this happened. Hilda and Zelda walk out in their old bathing suits, and the cop's unnecessarily difficult saying that there aren't any tubes allowed, and he wants them from now on. Why? Zelda gives him something I don't recognize and says, "I'll share it with you. I burned too." He walked away exhausted for some reason. Sabrina somehow thinks he's fun instead of annoying and unrealistically brave. She says there's some oars and wishes they had a boat. Hilda has to tell her for some reason that a witch can do anything. Then they'd have time spells too. So they row on a really narrow, barely visible boat singing the song for it. The cop rows over to them, and Hilda snorks cathartically, "This beach should list the things you can do." The cop tells them not to use boats in a swimming area. I guess it makes sense because with boats around, swimmers would have less places to escape the water and less room to swim. But he's still being too much of a stickler because it's only one boat. They're on a broom instead of a boat, and Hilda casually floats the broom in front of him to show him. It makes sense that they'd want to freak him out after how he's been antagonizing them. I'd have expected him to run away from them screaming at the start of the story. Zelda says his boat's full of holes. That came out of nowhere. I guess one of them used magic on it. He refuses to get on their broom and says he'd rather swim, and Zelda talks sarcastically, hopefully just pretending she doesn't know that it's a shark and not a fish when it's so obvious. He somehow jumps out of the ocean's surface because he's scared of the shark and runs back onto the beach. Yeah, how did he run on the water? It could have been explained that he walked on the sand below the water, but no. Somehow he was scared enough to do that on instinct. Maybe he is a witch. Hilda wants him to tell them what words he used to do that, when she'd know he didn't say any. She just assumed he thought them. Zelda and Hilda talk as if him being able to run on the water makes him nice because they prefer witches. Hilda must be just trying to tease him when she says he's so nice that they'll be back tomorrow, because she should know he doesn't want that. The story ends with a cop begging to be taken off beach patrol. This story was about Sabrina's family going to the beach and not even trying to hide that they're witches from a cop that's still determined to lecture them about the rules every time. They revealed their magic right away by landing on the beach in front of him, and he antagonized them afterwards. So it makes sense that they take full advantage of being witches in front of them to mess with him, and know that he'd never be believed about it. I love how much magic is in these stories, even if we'll never fully get used to them not caring about hiding their magic. Little Archie, issue 62. A nice, cool gal. Sabrina says the mailman left her family a lot of letters, and Hilda says they're nothing but bills. Sabrina says that Bill must be a pretty popular person because everyone's getting them. Zelda says that's because everything costs money these days, as if that wasn't always the case. Hilda says that's why they're remodeling the kitchen themselves, but they're having trouble. Even after Zelda said which way to do it, somehow they still aren't using magic to do it. So Zelda cuts the wood for the counter and it doesn't fit because she got the measurements wrong. And the counter is 42 inches long, not 24. How could she make that mistake? Is she actually dyslexic? Hilda says they need a counter to put things on. Then why don't they zap it up? Sabrina wants to help and just gets told to paint all of the cabinets green when they're finished. Archie invites her to the chocolate shop with his friends. Sabrina tells her friends everything in front of some people reading, and one of them says he never heard of painting the funny money green, and another says things change in every business. Sticky says that looks like the kind of place to print the stuff in. So they want to see how good their plates are and give them the business if the plates are good. The prospective thieves get scared by Hilda greeting them because she's ugly, and they say they're neighbors that supposedly want to help out. Hilda has a strange way of phrasing, asking them if they know how to counterfeit. Of course, they assume she means counterfeit money, and say they're great at it. It's not very likely that she'd phrase it like that, because you'd think she'd know what it'd be heard as. I see the puns where the writer got the idea for the story. Hilda leads the way and tells them that they're having trouble with the measurements. The bad guys figure out the truth, and Sticky says he thought they had some hot cabbage. It turns out that hot cabbage is actually old-timey slang for counterfeit money. Zelda really did have hot cabbage, and it's so hot that when she touches it, she ends up throwing it on his head. His sidekick snarks that it wouldn't taste bad with corned beef, and Sticky threatens them with a gun. I hope that's just a nickname. Zelda snarks that it doesn't look real because she's a witch who can easily defend herself. So one of the witches uses magic to make his gun send out a flag with the word bung. And Hilda says she never could spell very well. It should have been Zelda who made that impossible mistake. If stupidity is what they're going for with her. Sabrina comes home, and Jughead says he's seen the picture of Sticky on his station. Hilda zaps ropes around the bad guys. Sticky tries to attack the ants, and a brick wall gets zapped up in front of his fists. The cops show up right away, and Zelda says she used the witch wire telepathy, but that doesn't explain the cops being here instantly. Somehow Zelda thinks she nearly spilled the beans, and her caring about this now is confusing because usually the witches in this comic don't seem like they're even trying to hide it. As I predicted from the start, Jughead didn't see his picture at the police station. He was talking about a TV station about another guy who does the best pizza commercial on TV. Then he would have said he saw them on TV, not on a station. Or was that really how people tended to talk back then? This story was about some counterfeiters hearing Sabrina talk about her aunt stupidly trying to remodel the kitchen the mortal way, uncharacteristically of them. And they mistake her dialogue for counterfeiter slang, probably assuming that she's taking it too literally. When they find out the truth, Zelda accidentally spills hot cabbage on them because she touched a hot pot, and starts a fight that the ants easily win with their magic. And the bad guys get arrested. That was a creative story. Little Archie, issue 63, The Jet Set. On Zelda's cleaning day, Zelda casts a spell telling the vacuum, mop, and broom to help her clean Sabrina's room, calling her Little Sabrina, which is always kind of forced. Sabrina asks Zelda if she saw papers on her bed, and Zelda only saw them on the floor, and she burned all the paper in the incinerator this morning rather than just putting it in the recycling bin. Were those not common in the 70s? Sabrina says those were notes for her history report. Zelda should have looked at them enough to see that. Sabrina says she's supposed to have a report on the life of George Washington by tomorrow. As I'm waiting for Zelda to apologize because she should have heard her say all of this. Instead, Sabrina decides to cast a spell to bring a boy version of George Washington to her. Somehow he's dressed like him, complete with a white wig because that's how she'd imagined him. And yet she's somehow surprised that he's only a boy, when that's how she would have imagined him. Why did the spirits think she wanted this? She didn't say she wanted him, she said she wanted someone to help her with her history. She assumes that he can't help her because he's only a boy, even though he looks the same age as someone who's taking history class. They greet each other, and she says she has to do a report on his life. And he's told he's the father of her country, and he just laughs because he's only a kid. Why would he just be a kid when that clearly won't help her? This is an original plot, so that holds my attention well, but it's so stupid. Sabrina says she needs more paper, and he hears the sound of a truck going by, and gets freaked out by the truck, and Jughead blowing some gum. He thinks it's one of its lungs, even though it's pink, and Sabrina explains things. George finds out Jughead's crazy about burgers and ice cream, and wants to go get some from Pop Tate himself. Somehow Pop Tate thinks of George as a hippie, and it's weird to see it spelled with a Y at the end and not an IE. George wants to pay for the ice cream with fox furs, and Sabrina says in front of all of them that she'd better use her magic for this. So naturally he says he'd better go home and lie down after some dollars appear in his hands. Sabrina somehow thinks she'll get a good grade on her report, even though it'd only be based on George's childhood. She gives him a bag of burgers and he teleports home, and Grundy says she did an excellent report on George's early life. I didn't think she was only supposed to talk about his early life. Why would that be taught in grade school? That explains why she summoned a younger version of him who'd remember his childhood. Sabrina thanks her, and the story ends with Grundy joking that George is related to Jughead just because he was fond of food that most people already like. This story is about Zelda getting rid of Sabrina's history notes on cleaning day because they were on the floor, requiring Sabrina to zap up a young Washington to give her a lecture on history. At least it's explained that Zelda enchanted a mop and vacuums to do some of the cleaning for her. And they want to have looked at the papers to read them a little first before putting them all in a pile of papers to be incinerated. But all Sabrina said in her spell was that she wanted someone's help with history. I assume it's the spirits that made the decision to warp a young Washington to her. Because otherwise, she shouldn't be surprised that he showed up. It's annoying because we're just supposed to assume this. And apparently the report was on his early life and she got a good grade. So he was a good choice for the report. But it was confusing the whole story because I assumed she had to do a report in the adult Washington. It was interesting to see his reactions to the present day. What was actually interesting was his reaction to Jughead blowing gum. Little Archie, issue 64, The Party. Someone says Station Riverdale's on the air with the annual Winter Inter-School Olympics that apparently happened. I never heard of that. Sabrina tells her friends she brought hot chocolate and food there, and the coach disappoints Weatherby by telling him that their school doesn't have any entries. Weatherby says he'll be the laughingstock of every principal in the state, and when the coach complains, he says the school needs a new coach. When it's not his fault, none of the students wanted to enter. Sabrina feels sorry for Weatherby and hears an announcer wondering if there's any more contestants for the ski jump. Jughead's got skis on backwards, and Sabrina uses magic to make him do the jump backwards against his will. Why are we being shown the announcer instead of what Jughead's doing? Jughead impresses him, and Sabrina can't see to help him out because Weatherby's scarf is in the way, and God forbid she simply walks somewhere else. So Jughead gets stopped by a tree and wins the contest. Somehow Sabrina says that Jughead did that all without her magic, even though all he did on his own was crash into a tree. The announcer announces the bobsled race, and Archie says Jughead's going to do this one standing on his head. Wouldn't he be too injured from crashing into a tree? Instead he's standing just fine. Veronica wants to take Archie's picture sitting in the bobsled, and Reggie wants his photo taken instead because he's vain. The bobsled ends up sliding downhill, and Reggie tells Sabrina to use some magic to help them because he's scared, and because he said that, she can't do it because that would give her powers away. Even though she could just make her friends forget that he said that. She'd rather put them all at risk than let them find out she's a witch for even a second. The judges are impressed by two kids going down the slope on each other's shoulders, rather than disqualifying them because that'd be against the rules. It has to be because no one else is doing it. Archie can't turn with Reggie sitting on him. Reggie gets sent upwards, and the sled starts going backwards on the next curve. Archie can't see where he's going, but they still win. The other principals decide to go home, and the coach wastes my time thinking he's going to get fired before being told the good news. And Weatherby says the coach is a sly old dog who made him think they didn't have any entries as a joke. And he's conveniently in too much of a good mood from earlier to punish him for it. This story had there be no entries for the Inter-School Winter Olympics, which is apparently a thing, so Weatherby thinks he'll be a laughingstock, and Sabrina feels bad for him and uses magic to make Jughead enter the ski jump, which terrifies him. Then because Reggie tells her to use her magic in front of her friends when he and Archie accidentally slide down the hill on a bobsled, Sabrina cares more about not revealing her magic than protecting them. But it all worked out in the end because they didn't get hurt and even won despite Reggie blocking Archie's view and not letting him turn. But her using magic would be cheating, and it's bad enough Jughead didn't earn his victory.